Last week I was down in Milwaukee visiting my dad, and it was an enjoyable time visiting him and spending time with him. And one of the days where I was visiting him, I decided to go for a walk, and I walked past the church where I grew up, Christ King Parish, which is in Wauwatosa, a very large, beautiful church built in the 1950s, one of the last of the big ones. And I went inside. And I knelt and prayed and remembered a little bit of my experience as a priest and as a young person, and now my life as a priest and where my foundation and beginnings were. And as I was kneeling and praying, I remembered an experience that I had when I was a very young child. I was sitting at Mass like many young children are this morning, and if you can believe it, I was bored. And I remember I turned to my father, and I was looking around at things in the church, and I said, Dad, what's that gold box up in front behind the altar? What is that? Somebody live there? What's going on there? What is that? And I remember my father looking at me, and he said, well, John, that's where Jesus lives. That's where Jesus lives. And that was a good enough answer for me, and I went merrily on my way. And of course, I've been to seminary and I studied these things, and we all know the tabernacle is where we keep the Blessed Sacrament, the Holy Eucharist, and it's God's presence among us. But really, my father's explanation some 30 years ago was pretty good. This is where Jesus lives. This is where God lives. God is here. This morning, I'd like to speak to all of you about our faith in the Holy Eucharist and the responsibilities we have as Catholics towards Holy Communion and what it means. Every pastor has to have a talk about this every so often, and now is the time for me to talk to you. From the moment I came here to our parish now 4 years ago, I have been so moved and impressed by your devotion towards Holy Communion, your love of the Lord Jesus, your respect for the Holy Eucharist. It's really wonderful and awesome, and I'm proud of you. Our parish has a great devotion to Holy Communion, and that's wonderful. But every so often, we need to be reminded of a few things because sometimes we can forget or bad habits can come up that need to be corrected. So I'm going to speak to you now as a pastor and as a father. As Catholics, we believe that the Holy Eucharist, communion, is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. We believe as Catholics that when we receive Holy Communion, we are receiving God inside, truly God. It is not a symbol, as if to say we eat the bread and drink the wine, and we have warm, fuzzy feelings about Jesus, and we feel that he's near, and we're happy. Perhaps some of our brother and sister Christians believe this, but we believe something different. We believe that the Holy Eucharist is Jesus, completely. Totally. That's amazing. That's awesome. That means every Mass is a miracle. The bread and the wine become the body and blood of Christ, completely and totally. Just as we hear in the scriptures in John chapter 6, the Last Supper stories in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and throughout St. Paul, Jesus' flesh and blood, it is the Holy Eucharist. So because we believe this, we have respect, we have reverence, we have certain practices as Catholics that remind us of what we are receiving, that this is not just an ordinary daily occurrence. Practically now, there are two ways to receive Holy Communion, and when I speak of this, I mean the host. First, we can receive the host on our hands, or we can receive the host on our tongue. The universal practice of the Church is to receive on the tongue. In our country, we have permission to receive on our hand. Both manners are fine, as long as they are done with reverence and faith. But they have to be done with reverence and faith. About 50% of us receive communion on the hand here at Cathedral, and about 50% receive communion on the tongue. If you receive communion on the hand, let me remind you, you need to place one hand on top of the other and make a throne. One on top of the other, and your hands need to be flat. Just as flat as you can make them, like a plate. Sometimes if we have arthritis or we had an accident with our hand or it hurts, it can be very difficult to make them as flat as possible. Do the best you can. But sometimes what I see is hands that are placed at an angle, and with dry, chapped hands during January, the host will fall off. Sometimes people put their hands like this, like a cup. That is incorrect. Some people do something like this, and they take the host and they pop it like it's a jelly bean. That's wrong. Some people take the host and think that they're a lobster. You're not a lobster. We receive the host, one hand in front of the other, and then we take the host and we consume it. Some people take the host and they raise it up like it's a toast, like it's a glass of wine. Don't do that. Receive it into your mouth. Some people take the host and make the sign of the cross with it. That's very devout. Don't do that. Take the host into your mouth. Some people break the host. Sometimes they think it's a Ritz cracker and they're breaking it over clam chowder. Don't do that. Very disrespectful. If the host is too large, ask the priest or the minister to give you a small piece, and we will. But one hand over the other, and we take the host and we receive it. If we receive on the tongue, which is a beautiful option, we need to do this reverently and well, too. Quite frankly, if you receive on the tongue, you need to stick out your tongue so the priest or the minister has a landing pad. If you don't do that, it's very difficult. And please, don't bite. I've been bitten about 3 times, and it hurts. Don't bite. Gentle, gentle. When we receive the host now on the hand, remember, don't walk away with it, because if you walk away with the host, I will come after you. The ushers have been trained to watch, and if you walk away with the host, they will come after you. I know sometimes people are a little confused and they don't know, and certainly I'm presuming it's not malicious, I hope not. But if you see somebody in the pew who mistakenly walked back with the host, you need to say to them, you need to eat that, and you need to be firm about it. Why? Why is this important? Because it's the Lord. This is the Holy Eucharist. It demands respect, and this we must do. You know, we've had a number of hosts that have dropped in the past few months here, and you know, the reality, folks, is that we live on a planet with a very strong gravitational pull. Things fall. And usually it's nobody's fault. I have dropped hosts as a priest. We're human. But let's be careful and be a little more mindful of what I've just said so we can show respect. That's what it's about. Respect for the Lord. And this too. We need to make an effort, all of us, to come to Mass on time. Mass on Saturday afternoon starts at 4 o'clock, not 5 after 4, not 10 after 4. Mass on Sunday morning starts at 9, not 5 after, not 10 after. I know there's all sorts of things that come up. Those of you who have small children have told me it's very hard to get the kids together. I know it's tough. I can't imagine. I live right next door. I just walk right over. And usually Mass doesn't start without me, so I'm never late. Try the best you can. Things come up, cars don't start, shoes get lost, keys get misplaced, children have a temper tantrum. Life is hard when it's cold. But plan ahead. Yes, every so often we're going to be late. Okay, life happens. But if we're late every single Mass, very disrespectful to the Lord. Disrespectful. Plan ahead. And 2, when Mass is ended and the priest processes out with the servers and the music, on your way, but not before. Don't leave Mass early unless you got a call that your house is burning down, in which case go, or you're sick, or there's an emergency related to your job or your family. Other than that, stay for the whole Mass. What could be more important? A priest once said, I heard him say, the only place we're in a hurry to get to is heaven. Nothing can be that quick that we have to rush away. And if we worried about getting our first in line for pancakes or chicken, and we leave Mass early, disrespectful to God. Don't do that. God deserves better. Remember the fast. Ordinarily, there's an hour fast before we receive Holy Communion. Yes, an hour fast. Some of you remember when it was from midnight. That must have been tough. It's only an hour, and it's from the moment you receive communion, which means basically 15 minutes before Mass begins, which means basically you're not eating in the car. That's not hard. Certainly, if you're sick, eat. Certainly. But we fast for an hour to set our mind as we prepare ourselves to receive the Lord. That's why we do it, to focus the mind. Also, to remind us, as Catholics, we believe that the Holy Eucharist is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. We believe it's the Lord. Tragically, not all Christians believe the same thing. Christians who are Protestants are brothers and sisters who we have so much in common with. Sadly, we do not have in common with them faith in the Eucharist. And so because of that, there is not intercommunion in our church, because we do not believe the same thing. This is a tragedy. This is a sadness. And I know that it affects many of your families. But how can we receive communion with each other when we are not in communion with what communion is? How can we be in communion when we're not? And sadly, we are not. And we need to pray for this unity in the church. And so I urge you, your spouse, relatives, perhaps your children have fallen away, if they come to Mass with you and they are no longer Catholic, they may not receive communion. But invite them to come forward in the line if they wish, cross their hands in front of your chest, and I will be happy to give them a blessing. Happy to. But there is not intercommunion with those who do not share our faith in the Eucharist. And 2, when you go to perhaps your relatives' or friends' church for a wedding or a funeral or baptism, Protestant church, where they offer communion, as Catholics we may not receive that because we don't believe the same thing. It works both ways. Respectfully decline and pray. Also this, when we receive Holy Communion, we need to make sure that the house is swept clean before we invite the Lord in. What this means is that if we have committed serious sin, mortal sin, we must go to confession first before we receive communion. We must. If you're inviting Jesus to your house, you need to tidy it up. None of us is perfect, but if we have a serious sin in our soul, serious, we have to go to confession before we receive communion. If we do not, it is the additional sin of sacrilege. Don't do that. Go to confession. And also this too. Remember that this is a great blessing of being able to receive God in the flesh in Holy Communion, a gift, a precious gift. And so it is a sweet obligation for us as Catholics to go to Mass. And God bless you, you're here. But let's remember that it is the obligation that we have, and it's a sweet one, that it is our joy and our responsibility to go to Mass every Sunday. Why would we miss? The sin in missing Mass is, what are we putting in its place? Are we sick? Is there a blizzard, which happens a lot these days? Are we caring for a sick loved one? Does the car break down? Those are all legitimate excuses, of course. But honestly, not going to Mass because we want to go go and watch a bunch of people play a game, or kick a ball, or we're up hunting and killing animals, or we have a hangover, or we're lazy. What are we trading? The Lord of the universe into ourselves for a game or laziness? We go to Mass every Sunday, if we're able to, because it is the Lord who we worship, and we want to receive Jesus into our hearts. That's why it's an obligation, and it's sweet, and it should not be a burden, and we should do it willingly, because the Lord Jesus loves us, and he wants to come close. My friends, so many things having to do with the Holy Eucharist. These are just a few. Some may say, oh, it's all these rules, all these rules. Search the Scriptures. You will find evidence for all of these things. The reason that the Church teaches these things is because of the magnitude of what we are going to receive. It is not a symbol, it is God. And because of that, we got to be serious about what we're doing. And I know you are, and I'm proud of you for it. And our parish does well, very well. But every so often, we need to be reminded of what this is all about. Or we can put this another way, perhaps a simpler way. God lives here. All of us. God lives here. God is here. God lives here. May God bless you.